Hello and welcome to the analysis of the Hindu newspaper dated December 4th, 2022. In this video, we are going to talk about two important newspaper articles. Now, these articles are basically going to be regarding the electoral bonds. We are also going to talk about the Great Indian Bustard. Now, these articles are important, but this doesn't discard the fact that other articles which are present were unimportant. So, here's a list of important newspaper articles which we have compiled from the Hindu newspaper. You can go through all of these newspaper articles, but they do not require that kind of understanding, and that is why we have just boiled down to two important newspaper articles which we are going to discuss in this video. So do subscribe to this channel to never miss an update from the bureaucratic way, and join us on Telegram to get all the important PDFs important for the civil services examination. So with this, let's now head to the first important newspaper article for the day. Now, this particular newspaper article is regarding the electoral bond sales and what are the tweakings that have been done in the recent past, right? So now this particular article talks about the fact that the government has opened yet another week-long window for electoral bond sales starting December 5, less than a month after it amended the electoral bond scheme. So in the earlier period, in the last month, we have seen that electoral bond scheme was somewhat tweaked, it was somewhat amended, and now these amendations, these amends which were made are now being implemented in this particular month itself. All right, and the finance ministry on Saturday announced the 24th tranche of electoral bond sales through 29 branches of the State Bank of India, and the State Bank of India is solely responsible for the sale of electoral bonds across the country. And now this particular SBI is authorized to issue and encash the bonds from December 5 to December 12th. Alright, let's talk about what was the tweaking or what were the amendments done in the electoral bond scheme last month. So what basically happened is that the bond sale dates have been increased. Earlier, there were 4 periods in which you could buy the electoral bonds. Now, these periods were earlier January 1 to January 10th, April 1 to April 10th, July 1 to July 10th, and October 1 to October 10th. And these two, that is the October 9 to November 15th and December 5th to 12th, was introduced in the amendments in the electoral bond scheme on November 7th. Now, this particular electoral bond scheme was introduced basically in January 2018 as an alternative to the cash donations, because earlier what used to happen, the cash donations were made to the political parties. If you have to support a political party, then you have to bring out the cash donations. But with the introduction of the electoral bond scheme, it became more inclusive with the financial institutions, and the SBI was in charged with the duty of supplying all the electoral bond sales. All right, so now let's talk about what is this electoral bonds scheme in detail. Now basically the electoral bond scheme, we all know that it was introduced in the January 2018, and it was the alternative to the cash donations, right? Now the scheme allows donors to fund the poll campaigns of the political parties of their choice by purchasing bonds through specified bank branches, and the SBI have been charged with supplying all the electoral bonds. All right, so now the scheme originally envisaged making such bonds available for a period of 10 days each in January, April, July and October, and with this comes with an additional 30-day period to be specified by the central government in the year of the general election. In the year of general elections, there can be an increase of 30-day period. But now in 2022, after November 7, 2022, these periods have been increased. Now in the months of November as well as the December, you can buy the electoral bonds. All right, if this is very clear to you, let's talk about the eligibility. Who can buy and who will sell these electoral bonds? So only those political parties that are registered under the section 29A of the Representation of Peoples Act 1951 and which secured not less than 1% of the votes polled in the last general assembly elections, or state assembly elections are eligible to receive electoral bonds. Let me repeat it. The first criteria is that only those political parties which are registered under section 29A of the Representation of People Act 1951, and the second case is that they must have secured not less than 1% of the votes polled in the last general elections or state assembly elections and are eligible to receive electoral bonds. So these are the eligibility criteria which the political parties have to fulfill in order to issue the electoral bonds. But apart from it, we also have what is known as electoral bonds. We know who can purchase it. So who can purchase these electoral bonds? So electoral bonds may be purchased by a citizen of India or entities incorporated or established in India. Any foreign entity is not allowed to buy the electoral bonds. This is what is the eligibility criteria. Now let's talk about the validity of the electoral bonds. Now, as per the scheme's rules, the electoral bonds are valid for 15 calendar days from the date of issue, and no payment shall be made to a payee political party if they are deposited after the validity period. So, let's say I buy the bonds, and then the political party has to encash within the 15 calendar days, and after that, this particular electoral bond will have no value. All the money will be with the state bank itself, right? So this is what is the first criteria. And the second one is that the electoral bond deposited by an eligible political party in its account is to be credited on the same day. And the scheme allows donors to fund the poll campaigns of the political parties of their choice by purchasing bonds through specified bank branches. It brings about more transparency into the system. Now let's talk about the positives of the electoral bond scheme. Because there are many positives to it, we'll talk about just two. Now the first one is the system of bonds encourages political donations of clean money from individuals, companies, HUF, religious groups and charities, and it also brings about more transparency in the political donations. Now let's talk about the negatives, because negatives are also important, because negatives are many and we have boiled it down to just 5. Now the first one is the misuse. How it can be misused? So given the lack of disclosure requirements for the individuals purchasing the electoral bonds, it can be largely misused. And it also brings about more opaqueness in the political system. And with the electoral bonds, there can be a legal channel for companies to round trip their tax haven cash to a political party, because you do not have to disclose who is going to make this particular donations or who is buying these electoral bonds. Then it can act as a round trip for the tax havens to a political party. And apart from it, even loss making companies can make unlimited donations, which means that you can make all the shell companies in the world and you can buy all the electoral bonds, right? You get it, what I'm getting into it. So now the companies no longer need to declare the names of the parties to which they have donated, so shareholders want to know where their money has gone. This is also the main problem regarding the electoral bonds. So these are the positives, negatives, and we have also talked about the electoral bonds scheme. We have talked about the eligibility and what are the amendments made to it on November 7th, 2022. So this is it regarding this particular newspaper article. Let's now head to the next important newspaper article. Now this particular newspaper article talks about the great Indian bustards and how protection can be made to them. So now the Supreme Court on November 30 asked the government whether a focused approach, something like Project Tiger, can be taken up for saving the critically endangered great Indian bustard. So now great Indian bustard are present in Rajasthan, Gujarat and all of these areas. And mind it, the great Indian bustard is the state bird of Rajasthan, and that is why it becomes important. And apart from it, it also is critically endangered. And that is why the Supreme Court has asked the government whether it can make a more focused approach like the Project Tiger. We'll talk about whether it is possible or not to make something like the Project Tiger for the Great Indian Bustard. But before that, let's discuss what is this Great Indian Bustard. So Great Indian Bustard is basically the state bird of Rajasthan and is considered India's most critically endangered bird. Now it is considered the flagship grassland species representing the health of the grassland ecology. Now if you have a very good grassland ecology, then this particular species is going to survive more. So it is an indication of whether the grasslands are healthy or not. Now its population is confined basically to Rajasthan and Gujarat, but small populations of this bird are also present in Maharashtra, Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. And apart from it, the overall population of the GIB totals 150 across the country, which is very small amount. And out of them, only 128 birds. All of the 128 birds are in Rajasthan. So we can consider it that the fact that Rajasthan has the highest amount of great Indian bustard, largest number of great Indian bustard. Now, the earliest estimates show the population was about 1260 in 1969, but it has declined by 75% in the last 30 years. And historically, the GIB population was distributed among the 11 states in the western India, but today, population is confined mostly to Rajasthan and Gujarat. And why this particular thing has happened, that 1969, in 1969 we had 1260 birds, now we do have just 150 birds all across India. This is happening because of many threats which have been imposed to this particular bird. Now the great Indian bustard is critically endangered due to variety of threats, including the power transmission line. And how the power transmission line? So basically the GIBs are large birds that are not great flyers, that they do not fly very well and they have very poor frontal vision. Now which this particular things make them highly vulnerable to colliding with power lines and habitat loss. And apart from this, habitat loss, hunting and predation from free-ranging dogs and pigs are also among the threats faced by the GIB, because the dogs can hunt down all of its nest, it can destroy its eggs, and the pigs can also do this fact, and this poses the threat to the GIB because they do not breed that well, right? So these are the major threats to the great Indian bustard. Now let's talk about the steps which have been taken by the government or all the authorities regarding this. Now the first thing is that it has been listed in the Schedule 1 of the Indian Wildlife Protection Act 1972. It gets the highest amount of protection because it is critically endangered, and apart from it, it is mentioned in the Appendix 1 of the CITES, and it is also known as critically endangered on the IUCN red list. Alright, so this makes it, this particular bird receive the highest amount of protection both in India as well as globally. Now let's talk about the other steps which have been taken for the conservation. So basically we have the habitat improvement and conservation breeding of great Indian bustard, and this particular is an integrated approach, and it's basically the objective of this particular approach is to build the captive population of the GIBs and to release the chicks to the wild. And a total of 16 GIB chicks at this particular point of time are artificially hatched from the eggs collected from the wild, and they are being reared in the satellite conservation breeding facility at SAM, which is present in Jaisalmer, Rajasthan. So these are some of the efforts which have been taken. But this particular initiative, this particular approach, which is known as habitat improvement and conservation breeding of great Indian bustard, will likely take up to 20 to 25 years. And this is very slow, right? So we need immediate efforts as well. Now the Supreme Court has talked about the what is known as the a project like the Project Tiger for the Great Indian Bustard. For example, the Project Great Indian Bustard say. Now the conservation effort like Project Tiger may not work for a large bird of an arid region that can always fly out of the protected areas. Now the tigers can remain in the protected area. Sometimes they venture out of that protected area, but nonetheless they are protected in that particular area. But the great Indian bustard can always fly out of that region. So now a project like the Project Tiger, which is a very concentrated effort, may not work for the Project Great Indian Bustard. So we need to be more innovative regarding it. We need to make all the power transmission line underground so that they do not collide. Great Indian Bustard do not collide with the power transmission line, and this is the only solution regarding it. And the experts are calling for the community centric conservation of the species as well. If you protect the grasslands, then there are high chances that the great Indian bustard is going to survive, because great Indian bustard, the survival of the great Indian bustard highly depends upon the health of the grasslands, and that is why a community centric conservation of the species is required. So this is what we conclude in this particular newspaper article. We have talked about the great Indian bustard, we have talked about the conservation efforts, we have also talked about the historical population of it, we have talked about the present population of it, which is 150 in number across the country, which is 128 in the Rajasthan. So this is it regarding this particular newspaper article, and this is it for the day. Thank you from my side. Do like and share the video and subscribe to this channel. Have a good day. Bye.